Okay, so finally we have entered the label for this and the image here, and I believe that we set that image visible equal to false. Now, why did we set it equal to false? Well, when the game starts up, this won't be visible. And also, the same thing with this label. It won't be visible, and it will also have an empty string in it. Nothing there. Okay? So that's the way we start out initially. So all we're going to see is this part here. We won't see the coins. Okay, now, however, what do we want to happen? So we said if you have a match, then we want it to show this stuff and this, and we want it to beep. Okay? So how do we do that? We're going to use some code here like the following. So basically, when do we want to match? Well, this is the definition of when we get a match, or when we're going to show the beep, when we're going to say you win, when we're going to make the picture box, which is the picture of the coins, visible, when we're going to set its visible property to true. So this is how we define winning. Now, as I said, you could change this condition and define winning another way, like if you get a 7. But how did we define it here? We said if x equals y, but we don't, what is x and y and z, right? You don't know. But here, x is what you have currently, the text in label 1. Y is the text in label 2. Z is the text in label 3. So how do we define winning? If x equals y, or if x equals z, or if y equals z. So if any three of those happen, then we get this, you win, the coins become visible, and it beeps. Okay, and then we have and if. So you want to put this code. Now where do we want this code to be? Well, when do we want to show whether someone wins or not? When do we want this to happen? We want it to happen when the user clicks the stop button, but we don't have a stop button. We called it what? Catch. Okay, we could have called it stop. Normally we would call it stop, but here it just happens to be called catch. But when they click this button, whatever you call it, catch or stop or whatever, let's say when they click stop, then it's going to, then if there's a match, then it will win. So we want the code to have to be run when they click this button. Okay? So that's a little bit strange. You know, you have to think about when the code should run, when they win. It's a little bit fuzzy, but anyway, that's when that's when we want it to happen, right? So we want to have this code run when they click the catch button, so we put it in the catch button click event. Now we use this x, y, and z, and we defined x, y, and z here, and that's good, that's what we need to do. But we need also, whenever these are called variables, x, y, and z, and I think we don't actually need to define them. We could have just said, instead of x, y, and z here, we could have just said label 1 text for this, label 2 text for this, and we didn't need the x, y, and z, but it's a good example of using a variable, so we use it here, okay? I'm pretty sure you don't need to do it. You could have just literally written label 1.text here, label 2.text here, and so on. But anyway, we're using the x, y, and z, so when you use variables like this, you have to, or you're supposed to, declare the variables ahead of time before you use them, and that's called declaring the variables. And you can do that like that up here by doing this. So you can do it. You say you use the keyword, the reserved word dim. It means dimension. And dimension is another word for variable. Like when you talk about 3 dimensions, x, y, and z, those are dimensions, right? So we use that word dim to declare the variable. And then you name the variables. You can do this on 3 lines, or he's done it all in 1 line here. So you name the variables x, comma, y, comma, z. And then we said data type, and I said data types can be like numeric or they can be string, but I said that actually they get more fine distinctions than just numeric. We talk about different kinds of numeric data types, and one of the types is integer. So we're going to define x, y, and z as, we're going to declare x, y, and z as integers here. And so you do that up here, and then you do the rest of that here. Okay? And then, and this is all inside this button catch, in other words, this event handler. Okay, so we have all that. Anything new here? When we click continue, okay, so if there's a match, if you get a 1, 1, then the picture is going to show, and so is the label. Label 4 is going to say you win. Now if you click continue, you want that stuff to disappear, right? You don't want it to stay there, or maybe you don't want it to disappear, but let's say you want it to disappear when you click continue. Then what you want is in the continue event handler, you want to reset the text equal to nothing, the picture box equal to false, and you want the timer 1 to be enabled again. That means it's going to start spinning again. Okay, so when you click this button, the numbers are going to start changing again. Okay, so we have that, and then just one last thing, and that is when the user quits or exits the program, we want to tell them how many times they won. And that is accomplished by this code here. So when do we want this to happen? We want it to happen when the user clicks exit. So first of all, we want to put some code when the user clicks exit. And we're going to, this box here is called a message box. So we want a message box to show, and the way that you do that is you type this code. Message box is an object or a control, and then dot show is a function, we call it a method, that will be run. It's kind of like a property, but it's a little different. And you can put in this argument for the show function, or the show, it's called a method, but show function. So what is this method, what does this say? What is this argument? It says, it's a string. First there's a string, so it says you had, and then there's this thing and this thing. These mean connect this with what comes next. So this one means connect this and this, or put them together. So counter is going to count how many times they won, and I'll show you that in a minute. So counter might be equal to 8. It's a variable. It might be equal to 8. It might be equal to 10. It might be equal to 0. So it says you had, maybe it's equal to 8. 8, and then another, attach that to this, wins. So you had 8 wins. So it'll end up with something like this. Okay, now how do we actually get this counter to know how many times they won? Well, remember we had this if statement that says when they win, right? We defined when they win. So we said if this or this or this happens, then they win. So what we do is counter is also a variable. Remember we defined variables? We're going to define counter as another variable, but we're going to put it, look where we put it. Now we'll have to talk about why we put it up here instead of here later. We'll have to talk about that later. But we define this, we defined it a little differently than we did here. Here we do dim as integer. Here we do it a little differently, and we'll talk about why that is later. But we're going to, basically we're defining counter here, and we're setting it initially equal to 0. So when the program starts, counter is equal to 0. However, what happens? If any of these are equal, in other words, if they get a match, then we said we're going to beep, we're going to change the label to you win, we're going to make the picture true, visible rather, and we're going to do one more thing. Counter is going to be equal to counter plus 1. Now, in math, this doesn't make any sense. You can't say x is equal to x plus 1. You can't write that. But this doesn't mean equals. It means a sign. So a counter was initially 0. Let's say they got a match. Then what happens? Counter is 0 plus 1 equals the new value of counter. That's how you read this. So counter is now 1. Okay? And then counter is 1, and then they play again, they don't win. So this doesn't happen again. And then they play again, and maybe they get a match. So what happens? It beeps, this, and counter was 1, now it's what? 1 plus 1, now counter becomes 2. Okay, and then one more time, let's see what happens. So they play again, okay, it doesn't work, nothing happened, they don't match, so none of this gets run. They play again, none of these happen, so none of this gets run. But then they play another time, okay, one of these matches, we get a match, so it beeps, this happens, and counter was equal to 2, now what happens? Counter is equal to 2 plus 1, it's equal to 3. Okay, so finally at the end, it displays how many times they won. And that's the end of this. And so you need to save all of both of these projects and submit them together through Blackboard.